You know that moment when you realize your family's love only exists as long as you're useful to them? Yeah, that's exactly what I went through. For years, I tried to fit in, to please them, to prove my worth, but nothing was ever enough. What I didn't know back then was that being rejected by them would become the beginning of my freedom. Ever since I was a child, I was the different one in the family. While my older sister was always the pride of my parents, beautiful, outgoing, with perfect grades, I was the quiet one, the introvert, the one who preferred books over parties. My parents used to say I lived in my own world and that if I kept being like that, I'd never get anywhere. When my sister got into medical school, it felt like the entire world revolved around her. My parents threw a big party, bought her expensive gifts, and even helped her get an apartment near the university. I, on the other hand, only heard, maybe you'll learn something from your sister. Even though it hurt, I tried to move on. I took a technical course, started working early, and saved every penny I could. But every time I came home, I could feel their eyes judging me. My father once said, "You're just a burden, the only reason you don't cause trouble is because you barely talk." Then one night, during dinner, my mom said, "We decided to help your sister open her clinic. You understand, right? She'll need the money your grandfather left." That broke me. The savings were supposed to be divided equally between us, but suddenly, I didn't exist in their plans anymore. When I tried to question it, my father replied, "You don't need it. You don't even have ambition." That night, I cried more than I ever had before, but something inside me changed. The next morning, I packed my bags. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just a note on the kitchen table that said, "Don't worry, you won't have to be ashamed of me anymore." I left home with only a few clothes, my savings from part-time jobs, and a small notebook where I had written down my dreams, things I never dared to say out loud. My parents thought I was wasting my time, but I was determined to build a life that didn't depend on their approval. At first, life was hard, really hard. I worked 2 jobs, one as a cashier at a small cafe and another cleaning offices at night. I barely slept. Sometimes, I'd eat just once a day to make my money last. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered my father's words, "You don't even have ambition." Those words burned in my chest like fire, and that fire pushed me forward. Months passed, and I used every free minute to study online. I couldn't afford college, but I watched free business and design courses. I started learning about marketing, freelancing, and social media. Slowly, I began taking small online projects, creating logos, writing posts, anything that paid. One of my clients, a small local bakery, loved my work so much that the owner told her friends about me. From there, things started to grow faster than I ever expected. Within 2 years, I wasn't cleaning offices anymore, I was running my own small digital agency from a second-hand laptop in my rented room. And for the first time in my life, I felt proud. 3 years later, I had built something real. My agency had grown enough for me to hire a few people. We worked with clients from different cities, and one day, even a small hospital reached out. Guess whose hospital it was? My sister's. When I saw the name in the email, I froze. It had been years since I'd spoken to any of them. My parents never tried to call or check on me, not even once. The message said, "We were referred to your agency by a client. We're looking for someone to manage our clinic's online presence." For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They didn't even realize it was me. I accepted the meeting. When I walked into the clinic, my sister's face went pale. My parents were there too, helping her with paperwork. My mother gasped, my father just stared, silent, as if trying to process what he was seeing. I was no longer the quiet, insecure girl they had dismissed. I walked in confidently, professional, with a smile that said everything I didn't need to say out loud. After a long, awkward silence, my father finally said, "You've changed." And I replied, calmly, "No, I just became who I always was, you just never wanted to see it." The contract with their clinic was never signed. I didn't need their business. But that day, I walked out lighter than ever. Because I finally understood something. Being excluded by them wasn't a curse. It was freedom disguised as pain. For days after that meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about them. The look on my father's face, the way my mother's hands trembled when she realized who I had become. And my sister, she looked at me with something between pride and guilt. I thought that moment would fill me with satisfaction, maybe even revenge. But instead, it brought silence. A strange kind of peace that I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to them, not to anyone. In the months that followed, I kept growing my business. I moved to a small house with a garden, something I had always dreamed of. Every morning, I made coffee and watched the sunrise through my kitchen window, feeling grateful just to exist on my own terms. But sometimes, at night, I would think about how different everything could have been if they had simply believed in me, if they had loved me for who I was instead of who they wanted me to be. It used to hurt deeply, but slowly, that pain transformed into understanding. I realized my parents were not cruel by nature. They were blind to anything that didn't fit into their idea of success. And in their blindness, they lost sight of me. I used to envy my sister. She had everything I didn't: support, love, money. But years later, she reached out to me. Her message was simple: I'm proud of you. I wish I had your courage. That message made me cry. Not out of sadness, but out of closure. We met for coffee a few weeks later. She told me that the clinic wasn't doing as well as she'd hoped. The pressure from our parents had turned her passion into a burden. For the first time, I saw the side of her that I never understood before. She wasn't the enemy. She was just another victim of their expectations. That day, I made peace with my past. Not because my parents apologized, they never did, but because I decided to stop carrying the weight of their approval. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about saying it's okay. It's about saying, I won't let this define me anymore. Now, whenever someone asks about my family, I smile. I tell them we're not close, but I'm thankful for everything that happened, because without that rejection, I wouldn't have built the life I have today. Sometimes, the people who break you are the same ones who push you to rebuild yourself stronger. And sometimes, losing everything you thought you needed is the only way to find what you truly deserve. Epilogue: the letter I never sent. A few months ago, I found the old notebook I carried when I first left home. Inside was a list of dreams: get my own place, start a business, be happy, for real. I smiled as I realized I had done all of it. So, I wrote one last note, not for them, but for me. You are no longer the girl who needed to be chosen. You chose yourself, and that's enough. And with that, I finally closed that chapter of my life. Not with anger, not with tears, but with gratitude. Because sometimes, being excluded by your family isn't the end of your story. It's just the beginning of becoming who you were always meant to be. It's strange how life works. You spend years running away from your pain, and one day, that same pain becomes your purpose. After everything that happened, I didn't want to talk about my past anymore. For a long time, I kept it locked away, as if pretending it never existed would make me stronger. But the truth is, silence doesn't heal, it just hides the wound. One afternoon, while working from a cafe, I overheard a young girl crying on the phone. She kept repeating, I'm not good enough. They'll never be proud of me. Those words hit me like lightning. They were the same words I had whispered to myself years ago. So, I walked over to her table, sat down, and said quietly, you don't have to earn love. The right people will never make you feel small. She looked up, eyes red, and asked, how do you know? I smiled and said, because I was you once. That short conversation changed something inside me. I realized there were so many people out there, sons, daughters, dreamers, living in the shadow of someone else's expectations, just like I had. And maybe, if I shared my story, they'd believe in themselves a little sooner than I did. So, I started writing. At first, I wrote late at night, in between work and client calls, just pages of memories, thoughts, lessons. I didn't plan to publish them. But one day, I posted a short story online called The Day I Stopped Chasing Approval. I woke up the next morning to hundreds of messages. People from all over the world shared how they had been through the same thing: rejected, belittled, abandoned. And yet, all of them still had hope. That's when it hit me, maybe my voice could be more than just a whisper from the past. Maybe it could be a bridge for others to cross. Over the next year, I began speaking publicly, first at small community events, then at schools, and later at business conferences. I told my story not to gain sympathy, but to remind people that self-worth isn't something others can give you, it's something you have to claim for yourself. People cried, some hugged me, some just sat there silently, like they had just seen a piece of themselves reflected in my words. Then, one day, I received an email that brought tears to my eyes. It was from a girl named Sophia. She wrote, your story saved me. I was about to give up on everything, school, dreams, even life. But after hearing you speak, I realized I deserve to build my own path. Thank you for reminding me that I'm enough. That message changed me more than any success ever could. With time, I founded a small organization called The Chosen Ones, not because we're chosen by others, but because we choose ourselves. We offer mentorship for young people who feel lost, invisible, or left behind, kids who remind me so much of the person I used to be. We help them learn practical skills, find jobs, build confidence, and, most importantly, believe that their voice matters. Watching them grow, seeing their faces light up when they realize they can make it without anyone's permission, it's the most rewarding feeling I've ever known. Years later, I received a message from my mother. It was short, just one line. "I'm proud of the woman you've become." I didn't cry this time. I didn't feel the old ache or anger. I simply smiled because I no longer needed those words to feel whole. I wrote back, "Thank you. I hope one day you'll see that I didn't become this in spite of you, but because I had to learn who I was without you." We still don't talk much, but there's peace now, the kind of peace that comes when you stop running from your past and start walking with it beside you. I often think about that scared version of me, the girl who left home with nothing but a suitcase and a notebook full of dreams. If I could go back, I'd tell her, it's okay to be different. One day, your difference will be your power. And I'd remind her that sometimes the most painful rejections are just redirections toward the life you were meant to live. Now, every time I walk onto a stage, I look at the crowd and see hundreds of faces, each carrying their own invisible battles. And I tell them what I've learned, over and over again: you are not defined by who left you out. You are defined by who you became after they did. That's my truth, my mission, my story, and it all began the day my family excluded me. The day that once felt like the end of my world was actually the beginning of everything. Time has a strange way of softening things. The anger that once burned in my chest eventually turned to warmth, not for them, but for myself. Years passed. My organization, The Chosen Ones, grew far beyond what I'd imagined. We had mentors, workshops, volunteers, even partnerships with schools. People started calling me the woman who turned pain into purpose. I didn't see myself that way. I was just someone who had learned to keep going. But life, it always finds a way to test if you've really healed. It started with a phone call on a rainy evening. I almost didn't answer. The number looked unfamiliar, and I was tired after a long day. But something inside me said, "Pick up." "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, then a shaky voice. Is this Elena?" I froze. It was my sister. She sounded different, softer, older, worn out by time. "Elena," she said again, her voice breaking, "Mom's in the hospital. It's bad. She's asking for you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I hadn't seen my mother in almost 10 years. My heart raced, torn between old wounds and something deeper, something human. "I'll come," I said quietly. That night, I drove back to the town I once swore I'd never return to. The streets felt smaller, the houses older, everything was familiar, yet distant, like walking through a dream you half remember. At the hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. When I entered the room, my sister stood beside the bed, eyes red from crying. My father sat silently in a chair, looking fragile, smaller than I remembered. And there she was, my mother. She looked so different, pale, weak, but her eyes still held the same fire I had feared as a child. When she saw me, her lips trembled. "Elena," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. Years of silence stood between us like a wall. Then, she did something I never expected. She reached out her hand. I hesitated for a second, then I took it. Her hand was cold, trembling. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought pushing you would make you stronger, but I only pushed you away." Tears blurred my vision. For years, I had imagined this moment, her apology, her regret, but now that it was here, I didn't feel anger. I felt release. "I know," I said softly, "and I forgive you." She smiled weakly, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "I saw you on TV," she said, "talking about your foundation. I watched every video. I just never had the courage to call." That broke me. All those years I thought she didn't care, and yet, she had been watching from afar. We talked for hours that night, not about the past, but about small things, her garden, my work, my sister's children. For the first time, we were just two women, not a mother and a daughter trying to fix what was broken, but two souls finally meeting in the middle. When she fell asleep, I sat beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. A few weeks later, she passed away. Peacefully, quietly, holding the photo of my sister and me that she'd kept in her bedside drawer all those years. The funeral was small, intimate, and though grief hurt, it didn't destroy me like it once would have. Because now, I understood that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means letting love have the last word. After her passing, my father and I spoke for the first time in over a decade. We sat in silence for a long time before he finally said, "I don't deserve your kindness, Elena." I looked at him and smiled. "You don't have to deserve it," I said. "We both did the best we could with what we knew." He nodded, his eyes filled with something I'd never seen before, humility. And in that silence, something inside me healed completely. Months later, I returned home, not the house I grew up in, but my home. When I walked into my living room, the sun was setting, painting everything golden. On the wall hung a photo from our last youth mentorship event, hundreds of smiling faces, each one representing a story of survival, courage, and hope. And right beside it, I hung my mother's favorite saying, the one she used to repeat when I was little, though I never truly understood it until now: "What's meant for you will find you, even if it comes through pain." Years passed again. I kept growing the organization, helping others, traveling to schools and communities that reminded me of where I came from. Then one day, I was invited to speak at a major event, a global conference about leadership and resilience. As I stood on that grand stage, lights shining in my face, I looked at the thousands of people waiting to hear my story. And in that moment, I saw her, not in the crowd, but in my mind. My mother, my father, my younger self, all the versions of me that had once been lost. I took a deep breath and began. There was a time I thought being excluded by my family was the worst thing that could happen to me. But life has a way of turning pain into power. The truth is, we are all born into stories that try to define us. Some tell us we're not enough. Some tell us to be someone we're not. But we have the power to rewrite those stories. You don't have to wait for someone to choose you. You can choose yourself right now. The audience was silent, some smiling, some crying. And in that silence, I realized something profound. My story wasn't about rejection anymore. It was about rebirth. That night, as I walked outside, the air was cool and still. I looked up at the stars, the same ones that once watched me cry in loneliness, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to life itself. For the pain, for the lessons, for the full circle. Because now I knew. Sometimes the universe breaks you apart only to rebuild you into who you were always meant to become. Years later, when people ask me what I would say to my younger self, I always smile and answer, "Don't be afraid when they turn their backs on you. One day, you'll thank them, because that rejection will lead you straight to your destiny." And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the greatest revenge isn't success, it's peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally love the person you fought so hard to become. The years rolled forward quietly. My hair turned silver one strand at a time, like threads of light weaving through the story of my life. The foundation kept growing. I no longer ran every detail. I became its storyteller, its keeper of memory. Every morning, I still woke before the sun. Old habits die slowly. I made tea, opened the window, and listened to the same world that once felt too loud for me. It no longer frightened me. It sang. I started keeping journals again, not about pain this time, but about gratitude. Each page began with the same sentence: "I'm still here." When I looked around my study, I saw photographs from decades of work, smiling faces, graduation caps tossed in the air, small businesses opened by kids who once had nothing. Every single one of them carried a piece of my story forward. That was the real legacy, not buildings or awards, but people who believed in themselves because someone finally believed in them. One afternoon, a young woman visited my office. She said she was writing a book about women who had changed their communities. Her eyes shone with that same hunger I once carried. "Can I ask," she said, "after everything you went through, what kept you going?" I thought for a moment and answered, "Hope, and the stubborn belief that the story wasn't finished yet." She smiled, thanked me, and left. But her question stayed with me. Maybe the story really was finishing, or maybe it was simply passing into new hands. A few months later, my sister's daughter, my niece, Clara, came to visit. She was 24, studying psychology, curious, fiery, full of that impatient energy youth always carries. She sat across from me and said, "Aunt Elena, I want to understand our family. Mom told me pieces, but not everything. How did you forgive them?" I looked at her and saw so much of myself in her face, same eyes, same quiet defiance. "I didn't forgive them all at once," I said. "It came in pieces, like the way dawn replaces the night, little by little. You stop hating when you realize hate only chains you to what hurt you." She nodded slowly, then she asked the question that pierced right through me. "Do you think they were proud of you at the end?" I smiled. "Maybe, but I'm proud of me. That's what matters most." Clara began volunteering at the Chosen Ones. Watching her talk with the kids reminded me of myself when I first started, awkward, passionate, stubborn. Sometimes, she'd come into my office at sunset and tell me about the students she mentored. One day she said, "You know, Aunt Elena, you didn't just help people, you started a movement." That night, when she left, I sat alone and cried quietly, not from sadness, but from awe, because I realized the work would live on after me. The circle was complete. Years went by, gentle as soft rain. My body slowed down, but my heart stayed restless. I decided to write a memoir, not for fame, but as a letter to anyone who had ever felt unwanted. I called it Chosen. The opening line was simple: they excluded me, and I thought my story was over. But endings are only the places where new beginnings hide. Writing that book felt like stitching together every broken piece of my life into something whole. When it was published, I didn't expect much, but the letters that came afterward filled my home like sunlight. Letters from strangers who said they finally had the courage to leave abusive homes, start over, or forgive themselves. That's when I knew my voice had done its job. On my 75th birthday, the foundation hosted a celebration in the garden behind our building. Hundreds came: students, mentors, volunteers. They brought flowers, photos, and stories. During the speeches, Clara took the microphone. She said, because of her, thousands of us learned that rejection isn't the end. It's the beginning of becoming who you're meant to be. The crowd clapped. Some cried. I just sat there smiling, holding the pendant my mother once wore. In that moment, I felt her presence, not as the woman who hurt me, but as the mother who, in her own imperfect way, started the fire that made me strong. Later that night, after everyone left, I stayed in the garden alone. The air smelled of jasmine. The stars shimmered quietly, just as they had the night I left home all those years ago. I whispered to the wind, "Thank you for every storm that taught me how to stand." And I knew that when my time came, I would leave this world not empty, but overflowing with stories, with love, with peace. Now, when people ask what I hope others remember about me, I say this: remember that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a quiet woman packing her bags, walking into the unknown, and deciding her story isn't finished. That is my legacy. Not the pain, not the rejection, but the choice to rise anyway. Because in the end, every life becomes a message. And mine says simply, even the ones left out can light the way.